They often say that a daughter's first love is her father. It is meant to be the relationship that teaches her safety, trust, and unconditional care. But what happens when that love is fractured again and again before she even reaches adulthood? What happens when the man meant to protect her becomes a recurring source of disappointment, distance, and emotional harm? According to growing whispers from within extended family circles, that is exactly the reality one young woman has quietly endured. And now, as she approaches a future of her own choosing, those same whispers suggest she has made a decision so powerful that it could permanently alter the emotional legacy of her family. We have watched Kody Brown grow up on screen, year after year, moment by moment. Viewers first met her as a baby, surrounded by chaos yet full of quiet curiosity. Over time, we saw her become observant, thoughtful, and unusually perceptive for her age. We also witnessed one of the most terrifying chapters of her childhood, the kidney failure scare that placed her life in genuine danger. During that critical period, while medical professionals fought to stabilize her, questions were raised about where her father's attention truly lay. That moment alone left a permanent mark on public perception, but for Kody herself, it may have carved something far deeper. As the family later relocated to Flagstaff, the fractures within the household became impossible to ignore. Kody was often seen on the edges of conversations, watching rather than speaking, absorbing rather than demanding. While adults argued, relationships dissolved, and loyalties shifted, she learned something many children learn too early. Silence can be safer than confrontation. Yet silence does not mean forgetfulness. It does not mean acceptance. It means memory. Now, standing on the threshold of adulthood, a new narrative is emerging, one not driven by anger, but by clarity. Sources close to the family suggest that Kody has already formed a firm vision of her future, including one deeply symbolic choice: who will, and who will not, play a central role on one of the most important days of her life. According to these reports, when discussions turned to weddings and family milestones, Kody calmly expressed a boundary that sent shockwaves through those listening. She reportedly said she wanted only people who truly knew her, and that she refused to allow negative energy into her life's most meaningful moments. At first glance, that statement sounds simple, even reasonable. Many young people want peaceful celebrations free from conflict. But within the context of this family's history, those words carry extraordinary weight. In this household, negative energy has long been a label used selectively, often aimed at wives who spoke out, or children who resisted unquestioning obedience. But Kody's definition appears to be very different. To her, negativity is not dissent. It is neglect. It is instability. It is emotional absence disguised as authority. Those close to the situation believe this boundary effectively excludes her father from a role he has long assumed was his unquestionable right. The implication is devastating. Biology alone no longer grants automatic access to her inner world. In Kody's eyes, relationships must be earned through presence, protection, and genuine care. And by those measures, her father has repeatedly fallen short. To understand why this choice strikes so deeply at the heart of his identity, one must examine the belief system that shaped him. In the fundamentalist culture from which this family originates, a father is not merely a parent. He is the spiritual authority, the moral gatekeeper, the unquestioned leader of the home. Walking a daughter down the aisle is not just tradition, it is a public affirmation of patriarchal success. It symbolizes ownership, stewardship, and the transfer of responsibility from one man to another. For him, that walk represents validation. It is proof that he fulfilled his role, that his authority was respected, and that his legacy remains intact. But here lies the conflict. Kody no longer lives within that belief system. She is being raised in a home that values autonomy, emotional honesty, and mutual respect. The idea of being given away by someone who failed to show up when it mattered most does not feel honorable to her. It feels hollow. How can someone pass on authority they never truly exercised with care? How can a man claim pride in a bond he rarely nurtured? Kody's perspective represents a collision between two worlds, one rooted in control and entitlement, the other grounded in choice and accountability. And for the first time, the patriarch finds himself powerless. He cannot command this decision. He cannot pressure others into enforcing it. The power rests entirely with the daughter he once overlooked. This brings us to one of the most controversial justifications repeatedly used to excuse past behavior, the so-called tender-aged argument. For years, he insisted that certain children required his constant presence due to their young age, using this claim to justify extended absences from other households. Yet the timeline tells a far more uncomfortable story. When Truly herself was tender-aged, where was that unwavering protection? When she was vulnerable, ill, and dependent, she was not prioritized. Instead, she nearly lost her life while under insufficient supervision. That moment has never faded from public memory, and it is unlikely to have faded from hers either. Today's teenagers have access to archives, footage, and commentary. Truly can see the contrast for herself. Scenes of intense devotion toward some children alongside footage of her own medical crisis, where concern appeared delayed and detached. The disparity is stark, and it is painful. Now, as a young woman with growing confidence and discernment, she recognizes the double standard for what it is. She sees that protection was selective, presence conditional, and affection unevenly distributed. And she refuses to reward that imbalance with symbolic honor. This decision is not about revenge. It is about integrity. Further reinforcing her stance is her father's documented behavior at previous family weddings. At one daughter's ceremony, the focus shifted repeatedly away from the bride and towards his own performance. Jokes overstayed their welcome, attention wandered, and moments meant for quiet emotion became stages for self-expression. At another wedding, his constant complaints about logistics, cost, and comfort created tension rather than joy. Instead of being a calming presence, he became a source of stress. These patterns did not go unnoticed. Truly is observant. She has seen how milestones meant to celebrate daughters often became burdens he endured rather than moments he cherished. She understands that inviting him into her future milestones risks importing the same chaos she is actively trying to leave behind. She does not want a supervisor or a critic. By the time Gwen's wedding arrived, the family was no longer fractured, it was fully broken. Whatever illusion of unity once existed had vanished entirely. This was no longer a household struggling behind closed doors. The tension was visible, undeniable, and painfully public. And on a day that should have been defined by joy, one moment stood out as symbolic of everything that had gone wrong. The father of the bride arrived late. That fact alone carries weight. Not delayed by circumstance, not rushing in apologetically, but late in a way that communicated disengagement. When he did arrive, there was no warmth, no eagerness to reconnect with children he had not seen in months. Instead, witnesses describe a man who appeared withdrawn, visibly unhappy, and emotionally unavailable. He sat apart, isolated, clinging to one person while shutting out everyone else, projecting resentment rather than celebration. The imagery from that day has lingered in the minds of viewers and family members alike. While others mingled, embraced, and tried to honor the significance of the moment, he remained seated, sulking, radiating the very negativity his youngest daughter would later say she wished to avoid. He did not move through the room. He did not make the effort to reconnect. He did not rise to the occasion. And crucially, Truly was there. She did not watch this through a screen or hear about it secondhand. She witnessed it in real time. She saw her siblings being ignored. She saw her father positioning himself as a victim at his own daughter's wedding. She saw the emotional strain in Gwen's eyes, even as Gwen tried to remain composed. And perhaps most importantly, she saw that her father was unable, or unwilling, to set aside his grievances for even a single afternoon in order to show up fully for his child. That moment likely sealed something for Truly. It demonstrated, beyond theory or speculation, that even when invited, even when given the opportunity, her father could not step into the role she needed. He could not simply be present. He could only be himself, defensive, wounded, and centered on his own sense of injustice. If he could not emotionally show up for Gwen, there was little reason to believe he would do so for her. The risk, from Truly's perspective, is enormous. The reward is virtually non-existent. So now we have the pieces, the rumors, the motive, and a long trail of historical evidence. The question becomes not whether such a decision makes sense, but how the fallout will unfold when it is finally confirmed. What happens when the message is delivered, explicitly or implicitly, that he will not be walking his daughter down the aisle, or may not even be welcome at the event at all? We enter the realm of prediction here, but prediction grounded in nearly 2 decades of observed behavior. Rejection, especially public rejection, has never been handled well by him. Rather than prompting reflection, it tends to trigger revisionism. Reality is rewritten to preserve ego. If and when this boundary becomes clear, it is highly unlikely that he will respond with self-examination. There will be no quiet acknowledgement of missed phone calls, no admission of emotional distance, no recognition of absence. Instead, blame will be redirected. The story, in his mind, is already written. The responsibility, he will claim, lies elsewhere. He will accuse others of interference. He will frame the situation as manipulation, as betrayal, as a deliberate attempt to erase him. He will insist that his authority has been undermined, that his role has been stolen, that natural order has been violated. The language of victimhood will take center stage. But this narrative collapses under scrutiny. Truly is not a passive participant in her own life. She is intelligent, introspective, and deeply observant. She reads. She listens. She remembers. She has lived through the trauma herself. This is not coercion. It is consequence. One of the most persistent theories circulating among insiders concerns the absence of even basic communication. Reports suggest that long stretches of time pass without direct contact. Months without calls. Silence where connection should be. And this raises a devastatingly simple question. If you cannot walk the short digital distance of a phone call, how can you expect to walk the symbolic distance of the aisle? Truly is not being turned against anyone. She is responding to the void that was left behind. She is filling empty space with stability, safety, and people who consistently show up. The anger directed at her decision is not about exclusion. It is about entitlement. And entitlement loses its power the moment someone chooses autonomy. If this story has a central antagonist, it is not created by circumstance. It is created by pattern. But every narrative also introduces a counterbalance, a figure who demonstrates that another way is possible. And in this case, that figure is David Woolley. Understanding why Truly would reportedly choose David requires examining the contrast he represents. The difference between these two men is not subtle. It is profound. One thrives on volume, chaos, and attention. The other operates quietly, steadily, without spectacle. One demands loyalty. The other earns trust. David does not perform fatherhood. He practices it. He does not need to dominate a room to feel significant. He does not require validation through control. He exists with a grounded sense of self, comfortable outside the spotlight, confident without being loud. Where one man pulls attention inward, the other creates space for others to breathe. Truly has spent years observing what it feels like to live around emotional turbulence. Now she is experiencing the opposite: calm, predictability, and respect. And perhaps no moment illustrates this contrast more powerfully than the so-called Nacho redemption. Years ago, a deeply uncomfortable story emerged. One in which a harmless, human moment was turned into an instrument of shame. A woman enjoying a snack was described with disgust, reduced, and humiliated. That moment lingered not because of the food, but because of the cruelty embedded within it. It revealed a mindset where control outweighed kindness. Fast forward to the present. One of the earliest images the public saw of Christine's new chapter involved nachos once again, but this time, the tone was entirely different. There was no judgment, no disdain, only affection, humor, and pride. The same act, reframed by a different man, became a symbol of acceptance rather than shame. Truly sees this. She understands it. Children notice far more than adults realize. She sees how her mother is treated now, not as an inconvenience, not as a burden, but as a partner. She sees love expressed openly and without conditions. And when a man respects the mother, that respect inevitably extends to the children. This is not replacement. It is reinforcement of what was missing. David's approach to Truly herself further underscores why trust has formed. In photos and videos since the move to Utah, He interacts with her not as a possession, not as a subordinate, but as a young person with agency. He listens. He gives space. He does not attempt to assert dominance. He meets her where she is. This is what healthy masculinity looks like. It does not announce itself. Kody remains trapped in the past, clinging to the idea that his children are tender-aged extensions of his authority, props to be managed, controlled, or dismissed when inconvenient. David, by contrast, sees them as people. We observe him engaging rather than instructing, listening rather than lecturing, supporting interests rather than dismissing them. The suggestion that Truly might one day choose David to walk her down the aisle is not born of malice or revenge. That interpretation is rooted in a Kody-centric worldview. The truth is far simpler and far more powerful. She gravitates towards the man who stepped forward when her father stepped away. This marks a profound psychological shift. For much of her childhood, Truly existed in survival mode. In Flagstaff, navigating life around her father meant learning how to avoid his anger, sidestep his unpredictable moods, and stay invisible enough not to become the focus of his neglect. With David, that vigilance has eased. Survival has given way to stability. Guarded silence has been replaced by ease. She is no longer bracing herself. She is breathing. And when one imagines the pressure of a wedding day, a moment charged with emotion and vulnerability, the choice becomes obvious. Who would anyone want beside them? The person who triggers anxiety, or the person who creates calm? Picture the contrast clearly. David would quietly support the day without complaint, without bargaining, without turning logistics into power struggles. Compare that to past behavior, where finances, food choices, and minor details became battlegrounds for control. David would stand beside Christine with pride, focused not on cameras or speeches, but on the family they have built together. He would not seek attention. He would simply show up. If David were to walk Truly down the aisle, it would represent far more than tradition. It would symbolize a deliberate step away from the trauma of conditional love, away from the chaos of patriarchal control, and toward a future defined by peace, emotional safety, and genuine connection. It would mark the closing of a chapter that never protected her and the beginning of one that finally does. Yet while this decision is deeply personal, it has ignited intense debate among observers. Online discourse has reached a fever pitch, and public sentiment is strikingly consistent. Many see Truly not as rebellious, but as perceptive, a young woman who understands exactly what she is doing. The dominant view is that biology alone does not entitle someone to the most honored role in a child's life. Presence does. Consistency does. Care does. There is, of course, a counterargument. One that insists that a father's role is automatic and permanent, regardless of behavior. This belief elevates DNA above lived experience, obligation above well-being. But that argument collapses when examined honestly. Fatherhood is not a biological transaction. It is an ongoing act of commitment. Titles mean nothing without follow-through. This conversation inevitably leads to the step-parent debate, a concept once dismissed within the family's insular worldview. Yet David has redefined what that role can mean. He has demonstrated that being a parent is about showing up quietly and repeatedly, without demanding recognition. The public anger is not directed at Truly for setting boundaries. It is directed at the circumstances that forced her to do so. Then there is the inevitable secondary fallout. Any major decision involving Kody does not exist in isolation. Where he reacts, others respond. If he is excluded or relegated to the background, it is unlikely that the reaction will be limited to him alone. Patterns suggest that narratives of exclusion, victimhood, and injustice will follow. Attention may be redirected, blame reassigned, and emotional pressure applied through familiar channels. History has shown how quickly responsibility can be shifted away from behavior and onto perceived slights. The likely outcome is further division, a forced choice between protecting one person's peace or preserving another's ego. Public discussion has already anticipated this possibility, with many expressing concern not about optics, but about entitlement. The underlying question remains stark. Who does this day belong to? The overwhelming consensus is clear. Truly's well-being comes first.